Welcome to Public Affairs Roundtable, a discussion of current events in the nation and around the world and how they affect the people of Indiana. Here's your moderator, Larry Lough.
Those who are for it say collective bargaining for public employees is an issue whose time has come. Those who are against it say it's a desperate power grab by organized labor which is on the ropes here in Indiana. Today on Public Affairs Roundtable, we'll talk about negotiations for public employees and whether it is a bargain for the public. Our panelists are John Rouse, producer of this program and a member of Ball State's Political Science Department; Steve Fantauzzo, International Union Area Director of the American Federation of State, County, and Municipal Employees; Kathy McKimmie, Vice President of Human Resources for the Indiana Chamber of Commerce; and Russ Sloan, President of the Muncie, Delaware County Chamber of Commerce. John, they say that in the legislature, 95% of legislation is non-political, non-partisan, really. But we seem to have a very real Democratic-Republican split, a real political split on collective bargaining. Why is that?
Well, don't know that I think the issue is not being phrased as I think it should be phrased. You have to ask the question, as we've asked before, can you legislate morality? Can you make management be considerate of labor, and can you make labor be productive? And I'm not sure that a bill is going to be any panacea. Point number two, as the late head of the Major League Baseball said, work is the only thing that we have between us and death. And so work is a very important concept in this world, and we have to think in terms of how are we productive, how do we work, and can you make people be productive, and how do you encourage management to be considerate of those people who are producing?
First of all, we need to get some legislation. Steve, I want you to deal with the problem of politicizing this issue. A political payback for helping elect Evan Bayh governor?
No, absolutely not. I think if you follow the House Bill 1307 through its legislative process, that bill came out of the House with very strong support. It came out 2-1, 64-32, I believe was the vote, with a number of Republicans in support of the bill. The unions, as any interest group, take an active part, as does the chamber, in interest politics, and hopes to have our issues and our thought process framed within the minds of the legislature. But to say that the legislature is controlled by the unions at a time, as you stated, of declining union membership is ludicrous at best.
Kathy, John sees it as a philosophical thing. There are people who see it as a political thing. What is it?
I think it's probably a little bit of both. I think it certainly is a political issue, since it was a campaign issue during the last gubernatorial race. Governor Bayh said he would support a collective bargaining bill for public employees, although the type of bill that he has endorsed is certainly less than what is now contained in House Bill 1307. In terms of the philosophical approach, it is our opinion that public sector collective bargaining is certainly not in the best interests of the public or the taxpayers, and should be looked at much differently than private sector collective bargaining.
Good public policy or not, Russ?
It's not good public policy. From this standpoint, government's primary role in the private sector, in the business community, which we represent, is to ensure competition via antitrust laws, to prevent monopolies. Then why would we turn around and government allow the creation of a monopoly via collective bargaining of our workforce? It runs counter to what the government's role should be in providing competition. And I believe our country is built on a series of checks and balances. You see, the check and balance in the private sector with collective bargaining is, for instance, if our auto worker union rates got way out of scale and we were no longer competitive both in price and quality, Japan and Korea and West Germany would beat our ears off. So it'd be self-defeating. At some point, there's a check and balance. where's the check and balance in collective bargaining in public employees? You know, government's not going to go away. State government's not going to go away. Muncie's government's not going to go away. Where's the check and balance?
But Russ, the problem is that that is a very narrow interpretation of what government is and what government does. We have private sector utilities, telephones, for example, gas company, electric company. They provide a public service. They happen to be private. They are monopolies. Where is the control over those kinds of companies that provide public services? The government allows those monopolies to exist. Yet, if I'm not incorrect, the people in the electric business, the workers there, the people in the gas business, the telephone workers, they get to bargain in a collective sense. If we keep on paying public employees low salaries, we're going to get just what we deserve.
Let me follow up on that, if I could. To say that the workers in the private sector and the workers in the public sector perform different functions is to simplify the issue. Private sector workers since 1935 have had the right, and that's all we're talking about here, is the right, the opportunity to decide for themselves whether they want to join a union and to decide for themselves whether they want to bargain collectively. Much of the work that government does is not monopolistic. A city has an option of contracting out, if it so chooses, its refuse collection, for example. If a city contracts out, if the city of Muncie contracts out its refuse collection to a private concern, the employees collecting that refuse in that private concern have the right to form a union and to negotiate with their employee. Though that same function performed by government, picking up that same trash barrel, denies that public employee that opportunity.
May I step in here? When you say denies the public employee the opportunity, I would have to disagree. We are not denying, or the state is not denying anybody the opportunity to join a union. In fact, there are thousands of public employees that are members of unions right now, both at the state and the local level. What we're talking about in this bill is mandatory collective bargaining. Once there is an election of the employees, the public employer must bargain with that exclusive representative, that union. And the way the bill stands now, it would end up in a binding arbitration where an outside individual, in all likelihood from out of state, would eventually decide what the taxpayers are going to pay for. So there are union members in state and public local governments right now. The issue is whether or not we're going to have mandatory bargaining and binding arbitration, what this bill states.
The right to form a union, but yet not be afforded the opportunity to sit down and bargain over your wages, your benefits, and your working conditions. Without that right, having the right to form a union is next to no right at all. When we talk about, Kathy, when we talk about the binding arbitration provision of the bill, I think it's important to point out that binding arbitration provision goes hand in hand with a prohibition to strike on the part of public employees. We've consistently taken a position that as an alternative to strikes, it's an acceptable resolution to an impasse to allow an arbitrator to make a ruling on the issues that are put before him. And that arbitrator, specifically in this law, can only look at the positions of the employer and of the employee and choose between them. He has no right to mediate that position.
Indiana's only real organized experience with collective bargaining in the public sector, organized, is with teachers. Has that law worked? Is education better because of it?
I think education is more productive because of it. I don't think that our goals are different than that of the employers. I think both the employees and the employer are looking for a work environment that produces high morale and that produces productive employees.
I haven't seen that in evidences of other union activities. Unions have responsibilities to maintain their membership, and believe me, I think there's a lot of injustices that can be corrected with good policies and procedures that you don't have to necessarily go the union route. But I well remember the railroad people who wanted to retain fireman jobs when there were no no longer coal-burning engines. I don't see where there's the incentive within the unions to have cost-effective operations. If that means trimming jobs to be more cost-efficient, more productive, I don't see a history of unions participating in that.
Well, I think what we have to look at too, I mean, it's convenient to mix private and public sector examples at times. But if we look at the private sector, or at the public sector, excuse me, I think you'll see that that unions have worked hand in hand with employers in times of fiscal crisis and in times of dire straits. I can point to some recent examples in the past that I'm familiar with. The city of Detroit, where they were going through their economic crisis, where the unions involved there took no wage increase and went hand in hand with the city to the federal government and to the state legislature and tied their raises to the general revenue share money that they together were able to produce. City in New York, it was the unions that put up their pension money to bail the cities out when the banks and private sector refused to come forward. I think that if we look at what unions are looking for in the public sector, we're looking to correct some of the inequities. And when you have welfare workers that are paid the worst, the entire worst in the nation, we think that the fact that there's a 75% turnover rate in welfare departments has something to do with that. And we think that there's a cost to the employer of retraining employees every 35 days.
What about, you talk about the acts of cooperation. I've seen it here locally, and I've seen other places where the police, for instance, the loyalties to the union superseded their sworn duties to do their job as police officers. I've seen that happen in fire departments. We talk about no strikes, so what's to prevent work slowdowns? Where is the check and balance? You take the organization. Who represented the taxpayers of Indiana and all of the expensive media advertising on television for collective bargaining of state employees? Where was the line item in the budgets of the state departments to represent the taxpayers to present the other side? Why do we have this one-sided recruiting opportunity? Where's the check and balance for the taxpayer? It does not exist. And if you think it's going to be at the legislative level, I can flat guarantee you, and you just look at how the teachers have targeted certain representatives, when the public sector employment, which passed the private sector employment several years ago, there are more public employees in America than private sector employees. When they outnumber the private sector, the ones that are basically paying the bills, and you remove the check and balance, I guarantee you, if the legislators don't give what they want, they'll target them and vote in somebody who will give them. You got direct access to the public treasury.
Well, that's politics, Russ, and it's not going to change, I hope. But I don't really think we're dealing with the issue. It gets back to labor management and the relations between the two. If management or leadership is doing its job, if it's communication processes are good with labor, you don't need a labor union. You have the thesis and you have the antithesis, so that communication line has to stay open.
It doesn't take a labor union to do that.
That's the point.
I'm
not quite saying that. I'm saying I haven't said that legislation is a panacea. How do you legislate morality? Last week we talked about education. My perception is that management protects incompetence, labor protects incompetence, even the consumer, parents, protect incompetent kids. The issue is, how do we get around these structures called management, business, labor, and look towards the future?
But in the public sector, the taxpayer does not elect the union.
That's right.
The employees elect the union, which means that as soon as there is a union there that is negotiating with the public sector employer, which is an amateur in this process, an amateur that will be up against international unions that are not AFSCME necessarily, but the UAW, the Teamsters, traditional private sector unions, which because of declining membership are now seeking fertile territory elsewhere, and public employees are a very good target for them right now.
But isn't it incumbent then that the management then become more enlightened in
Sure
their
it is.
employment policies,
Sure it is.
so you don't have to have a union?
Sure it is.
Absolutely.
And let me stress again too that the legislation that we're talking about here doesn't mandate a union as Russ seems to be indicating. It allows for the employees to decide whether to have a union or not to have a union. Unlike some of the examples that you mentioned earlier, the membership of this union has not been declining. In fact, has been growing steadily. And I think if
I'm
you
talking
look
about
at
private sector unionism in
Private
general.
sectors has been losing
It's less than 17% now, and the projections are that by the year 2000 it will be about 5%.
Because worldwide competition is a leveling force. There's not that. You know, I'm always amused somewhat by the statement, well, the employees have a right to collective bargaining. Let me tell you, there's a greater right, and it's the right for anybody in America to hold a job without joining anything. Now, I could be a lot more sympathetic to collective bargaining if employees were not forced to join or forced to pay any fees in lieu of so-called joining, where there was a real right, a real check and balance. Because if I'm one of that 49%, if 51% voted for collective bargaining, and I'm part of that 49%, and I am forced to join, I think that really runs counter to my rights as an individual. Plus, if that union's doing it, where's the check and balance? You see, the only check and balance in a monopolistic union setting like that is my decision personally to join or not join and give them my money. That's my only check and balance.
Let me address that if I could, Jim. To refer to unions, first of all, in general, as monopolistic, I think runs contrary to the experience in this country. I think unions are probably internally one of the most democratic organizations in America. Evidence of that would be to take your example, Russ. If 49% of the people voted against a union and 51% voted for a union, by changing 1.5%, you could decertify the union if the union wasn't doing its job for the majority of the members. I'd also like to deal, if I could, with the fair share issue. As the law stands today, the law requires that we, as representatives of all employees, represent all employees. It does not give the union the option of representing only its members, only those who pay dues.
Do you mean the bill says that?
The bill, thank you. The bill says that you must represent all employees, and you must represent them equally to the best of your ability.
Could the bill be amended to not allow you to be the exclusive representative?
If the bill was amended to allow us not to be an exclusive representative, that would minimize the need for a fair share agreement.
But, as a Chamber of Commerce, we try to represent the free enterprise system within our community, whether businesses are members of the Chamber or not. Now, we hope that we do a good enough job that they join, but we can't force, nor would we want to try to force, the businesses who aren't members to join our chamber, even though we're going to work for the best free enterprise environment that we can have, whether they're chamber members or not. Why doesn't the union take that approach?
And Steve, you mentioned democracy. You were very democratic. A couple of years ago at the NEA convention, National Education Association convention, over 80% of the participants, the delegates to the convention, voted that they should have the right to join the union and not pay fair share. Yet the union decided that they wanted fair share. They wanted compulsory representative fees, regardless of whether or not the rank and file wanted it.
If I could take this back to the public sector in terms of the essentials, the concept of taxes, the concept of the public sector, what is the public sector going to do? Again, if we continue to pay low salaries for teachers, if we continue to pay low salaries for those other workers in the public sector, we can expect less than satisfactory service.
Well, John,
we could argue.
I'm not looking towards unions. I'm just looking towards trying to figure out and if the public sector is not going to do it, where is going to be the social responsibility for private corporations? What are private corporations going to do in terms of these issues?
You talk about social responsibility. Who do you think gives the billions and billions of dollars to all of the variety of charities in America? It is the private sector. You just look at right here in Muncie, the $4.7 million that came for the Horizon 91 program to create jobs. Where did the bulk of that money come from, John?
I'm not talking about, but I'm not talking about the charities. I'm talking about public services. What if the private charity is going to supply the money that is not going to come from taxes? Where is the money going to come from to provide good education and good public services?
John, we elect representatives. In our process, we talked about believing in a Republican form of government. We are a republic. We elect representatives. We're representing a form of government to make those decisions for us. We didn't elect the unions to make those decisions for us. And so it's our elected officials that we elect to be responsible.
The elected
there is no
official
options
is
bill
who you,
for the county
is who
government.
you represent, right, or who you elect, Russ. But the employees who work for that individual don't work for him as an elected official. They work for him as the boss. They work for him as their manager. They work for him as the person who's making policy decisions. They work for him as the person who's setting their pay rate. And to say that a pay rate for state employees here in Indiana that ranks 39th in the nation is acceptable, to say that Indiana should deny its employees the right to be able to bargain collectively when every other Great Lakes state in the area provides those rights to its employees. To deny that we have welfare workers that are making $7,000 a year. We have welfare workers that are eligible for the assistance that they give out. And that's criminal.
Yeah, and I don't condone that. And also, you might want to check to see what the garbage collectors make in New York City too. And so I can point to the other extreme where the public's getting ripped off by the same kind of.
Let's keep this in Indiana.
No, but and I tell you, I look at the tax rates of some of the Great Lakes states, and no, thank you. I don't want to pay the tax rates of Michigan. And so
I think it's very misleading to simply and easily try to tie those two issues together. I've just, if I could finish, Kathy, I've just concluded a set of negotiations you brought up New York City, with the state of New York for state employees that provided reasonable and adequate wage increases for those employees. At the same time, we're able to have a tax cut for the general population. I think one point that we have to remember is every employee working, whether it's in the city of Muncie or for the state of Indiana, is also a taxpayer and is also concerned about those issues.
House Bill 1307, as it stands right now, and the estimates from both the Legislative Services Agency and our own analysis have shown that it will cost about $500 million in its present form. This is state, local, universities, non-certified employees of local schools. That amounts to about 1 penny increase on the state sales tax for the state of Indiana. So it's a very, very expensive proposition.
Well, I'm not.
In addition to the your point about elected officials being responsible, this bill, as it stands right now, does not allow cities, units of government over 5,000 population to determine whether or not they want to opt in to this process. They must be in this process. So you've automatically, from the beginning that this bill passes, taken that responsibility, which is legislatively, statutorily given to the local officials, and said you don't have that authority anymore to decide whether or not you'll have mandatory bargaining at the local level.
But Kathy, why, excuse me, Steve, why would the citizens of Indiana not want to pay more money for better education?
Because they're not. They would.
Why would they want to keep it at the level it's at now? Why is it not in the best interest for the citizens of Indiana to pay more for public services so we can improve our roads and improve our education?
People will pay for better schools and better education. But I tell you, when you look at the test scores, when you look at the dropout rates, when you look at the reading levels, and you try to automatically correlate dollars with productivity, it doesn't automatically correlate. Believe me, there was a lot of one-room schoolhouses, and my dad was a graduate of one of them, who got a heck of a lot better education in that one-room schoolhouse than they're getting today. Certain amount of expectation levels. Check the efforts in reading and writing and arithmetic, the basics, and see if we're doing a decent job in just teaching that.
Okay, but where is the leadership? I don't see our governor. I don't see our public officials. I don't see those
and it's not one, John, it's not
private corporations raising those issues so we don't have to raise taxes.
Oh, they're raising those issues.
Let me, if I could, go back to a point that Kathy made when she was talking about the Commerce's own study on the cost effects. To equate it to a penny is probably mathematically accurate. I think you got to look at some of the assumptions that you're making that are far from accurate, at least in the world as we know it. Those assumptions assume that every jurisdiction automatically is going to choose to have a union, and that those unions automatically are going to be in negotiations, and that those unions are going to get wage increases of 10 or 15%. I forget what the number was. None of those factors are which.
We're not assuming it's being done overnight.
In terms of the 5,000 number
very short order
for the cities, that provision as it stands in the bill right now in House Bill 1307 doesn't deny the cities the opportunity to opt out. What it does is allow or grant those employees the opportunity to choose to bargain if they choose.
And if they vote the union in, the city is bound to bargain with them.
The city is bound to bargain with the representative that those employees have chosen.
And that covers right now 87 cities, the cities and towns have said 87 cities would have to bargain if the union was voted in.
Don't you think it's a little strange that in the private sector, the unions have dramatically lost membership, and the only fertile ground is in the monopolistic areas of the public sector where there is no competition?
I don't think that's
but that's only for a couple of reasons. First of all, the labor got everything written into law as of the 1980s. They got everything they wanted, so they didn't lose, they won. And secondly, in terms of unions, just like management, they too are not responsive to women. They're not responsive to blacks. And so unions suffer because if everybody was labor, somebody would end up being management. So organized labor has not been responsive to
That's
new
because of the
things.
seniority system has hurt women and hurt minorities.
I think, first of all, to say that this is the only fertile ground downplays the issue. I mean, the fact of the matter is that since 1935, public employees or private employees, by the swipe of a pen, had a right to join unions. And that law has not existed in every state and every city and every county. We have had to fight to establish that right. In 21 states right now, public employees currently don't have the right to join an exclusive representative of their choosing. As those laws change, and those Alabamas and Mississippis move into the 1990s, that'll open up a new opportunity for the employees in those states.
No more opportunities here. We're out of time. And now opportunities. Thanks to John Rouse, Steve Fantauzzo, Kathy McKimmie, Russ Sloan for being with us today on a discussion of collective bargaining. I'm Larry Lough. See you next week.
Public Affairs Roundtable is produced in the studios of WIPB Channel 49 on the campus of Ball State University. The producer is John Rouse. Listener comments are welcomed.